Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions here with my uncut review of The Flash. Oh my gosh, as a big DC fan, I've been looking forward to this, thinking this could be my movie of the year. Did it end up being that? Stick around and I'll share my thoughts. The synopsis on IMDb reads... Oh, first off, I should say no spoilers for the main review. I'm going to give a big warning later on for when I will enter spoiler territory. You won't be able to miss it as long as you're not skipping through, you know. And you can also check the timestamps in either the video or podcast to jump straight to the spoiler reactions if you just want to jump straight there. Anyway, synopsis for this one on IMDb says, Barry Allen uses his super speed to change the past, but his attempt to save his family creates a world without superheroes, forcing him to race for his life in order to save the future. All right, so I'm assuming that you've seen maybe the trailers for this movie, and I'm not going to talk about anything before I get to the spoiler section at the end that hasn't already been glaringly obvious based on the trailers that have been shown. This one runs 2 hours and 24 minutes. I mean, some of that's credits, of course. The first 90 minutes, as far as just what does this animal feel like, the first 90 minutes mostly felt light and jokey, but with lots of action, lots of dazzling spectacle. And let's see, and I would also say that the jokes sprang out of, is sprang a word? Sprung? They came out of who the characters were. They weren't just kind of like random one-liner quips or whatever. So at least it was coming from that place, but they weren't jokes for the most part that made me laugh. Now, I'm not a good indicator of what makes people laugh because a lot of people laugh at the Marvel movies and I just usually do not find them funny and haven't almost since the very beginning. This one has some brief beats of drama, which I found very valuable, as the story hinges on Barry's childhood tragedy. And though these moments that touch on this drama or kind of move that part of the plot forward and develop it a little bit, they're given just enough breathing room and authenticity to be acceptable. But I wanted them given more. Oh, I so wanted them given more, even with the 2 hour 24-minute runtime. It's not that I necessarily wanted the movie to be longer. I just think it could have trimmed down some of the jokey moments and left just a little more breathing room for some of these more serious beats. I had heard way back that Ezra Miller, who plays the Flash, was excited about this script because of its serious tone. I can see what that might have referred to, but I'm glad we didn't get the potentially funnier version of this movie. I did chuckle throughout the movie at various points, but only at about 1 in 10 attempts at humor. However, the last 45 minutes, I felt like finally dropped most of the jokes and leaned into drama, leaned into actual intensity and suspense in the action. So I finally was feeling at that point like someone could be hurt or could fail in a meaningful and impactful way. And so I was really engaged with the action on an emotional level instead of just kind of saying, oh, that looks cool, as I was for a lot of the front half of the movie. The action and spectacle combined with my longtime love of the Flash in the comics really, I have to say, helped my enjoyment of the first 90 minutes a lot. But I wish it had far fewer jokey moments, especially when they came at times at the cost of feeling true suspense in action scenes. That said, again, the last 90 minutes had both suspense and real drama that even brought tears to my eyes more than once. So it's hard to kind of say that the whole thing felt like this because there was definitely a shift and there were some beats throughout that varied up what the feel of the movie was. As far as the cast goes, again, at this point, I'm only going to mention story details that are glaringly obvious if you've seen the trailers. If you don't want even those, then stop listening now. Again, I'll give big warnings for all real spoilers later on. Ezra Miller stays true to the performance style established for The Flash in Zack Snyder's Justice League, as well as, unfortunately for me, the more jokey and I think slightly overstated style of that performance of The Flash in Joss Whedon's cut of Justice League. Miller also does great as the alternate Barry, who certainly is distinct in personality from main Barry. So I appreciated the performance there. The actors playing Barry's parents were wonderfully grounded and warm in their affection, so I thought great casting there. I would have loved more scenes with them. Michael Keaton brings his trademark subtle facial acting to really just elevate the script and add implied complexity that is technically not actually in the dialogue. So I love it when you have an actor that can perform in that way, and you can just you get a sense of what they're thinking and feeling despite what may be coming out of their mouth. And when the two are at odds with each other, I just love the richness that creates in such a short span of time. So performance really does a lot for me, and Michael Keaton's performance, especially when he didn't have the mask on, was really great stuff. The actress playing Kara, aka Supergirl, I'm not familiar with her name. She gives an appropriately dark and serious performance given her circumstances, and adds great weight to her scenes because of that, especially her action scenes in the last 90 minutes, which again, I really appreciated the intensity of the drama that she brought, and how that motivated, like what was going on in her emotionally, and how that motivated her actions at the end, made her action scenes just great. Other returning actors reprised their roles solidly. I won't give more specifics than that. No complaints from me. I almost thought that Ben Affleck's Batman was too smiley and pleasant in one moment, but a second later, the story justified it in a really funny way. So I'll let you guys discover that for yourself if you haven't seen it already. Stunts and visuals. Generous amounts of wild spectacle throughout. I really enjoyed all the effects related to super speed, all the crackling, arcing, lightning, and tendrils that are connecting and jumping off of each other. I mean, really, really cool stuff. They just cut loose with the visual effects for that stuff. And for most of the other superhero action effects, too. I really just enjoyed them. For a movie that's just called The Flash, and being that it's a first solo movie for the character, it felt bubbling over with visual effects shots that I wouldn't necessarily expect in a first movie about a character that maybe isn't, the super popular as compared to, say, like Spider-Man or Batman or whatever. As a comic fan and a longtime fan of The Flash, I couldn't be much happier with just visually how they represented super speed and the accompanying visuals of the Speed Force. But the faces, the numerous CG faces. Sometimes just before a character does something super, you're like, okay, they didn't have the actor there, or it was a rough transition, and so you can tell, like, at least I can tell. My eye is cursed to pick out CG. I need to repeat that, even though some of you guys have heard me say that ad nauseum. But like sometimes it would be right before, Kara flies off and does something super heroic. They give us a brief hero shot before she goes off. And I'm like, oh, they didn't bother getting the actor for that shot. They just thought, no, CG all the way will be good enough, And so instances like that are kind of like touching up next to accompanying action is when some CG faces really showed up. Other scenes that weren't necessarily action scenes, but they were reproducing an actor with CG. It was just like, oh man. There was one scene where I was like, why are you doing a face replacement here? What in the world? And it made me wonder if this was somehow manipulated footage from an earlier version of the movie, because for those that have been tracking the news of this movie, it did undergo some pretty extensive reshoots. And so I'm wondering if, like, one scene, I'll just say, had Barry wearing the Flash mask, and I was like, either his face or that mask is digital. Something is not right. And I was like, why are you doing that? Because that his mask and his costume weren't necessarily digital all the time. There were times where I think it was, but other times where I'm like, no, you're using, unless they just got really awesome and it was digital throughout the entire movie. That would be a cool surprise to find out. But there was just like one scene where I was like, why in the world does this look funky and not real? There's no justification for it in the story, in the moment, in what's happening. For some reason, I'm just like, well, what was this scene originally made for, But yeah, I think, and then also, let's see, what else? No, I won't say anything about that. CG actor replacement, I think, works best when filmmakers understand and act accordingly to the weaknesses and limits of CG. You put an object in between the camera view and the face of the character when you're gonna go all CG, or you show their face just like for a split second. You cover the character's face with hair, whatever. You do something to justify for just a moment not showing us the face of that character, because you understand, hopefully, that's where CG really tends to fail, is in mimicking the subtleties of human facial movements and expression. But this movie feels unjustifiably practical proud of its CG faces. I mean, I don't know that that's the attitude of the filmmakers. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying if I were to personify this movie, the movie feels unjustifiably proud of its CG faces. And it just results in this uncanny valley for me all over the place, ranging from just stiff to creepy. My hope is that the movies of the last 20 years that have been doing this will eventually get, I don't know, AI upgraded CG remasters in 10 years. That, like, they don't want to go back and have people touch these up. But maybe there'll be some AI program that they can just hit a button and let it process for a day or two, and it'll just come out looking indistinguishable from reality. If they learn how to do that, I would love for them to just put all these movies through that machine when the tech can do it, maybe 10 years from now. I so wanted to be fooled by so many CG actor replacements and actor replacement moments in this movie. It would have tickled me as a DC fan so much if they could have stuck the landing on that. But they leaned on it again and again in a way that I think was unjustified given the quality of the final product. Instead, I disconnected from numerous moments, and a few even just made me a little sad thinking about what could have been. Still, I need to say all these comments about CG faces are disproportionate to my overall feeling about the effects in this movie. Most of the CG did crazy cool comic book spectacle in a very satisfying way for me, and they even did some practical vehicle stunts early on that helped ground the movie without sacrificing visual flair. This movie blows the doors wide open in applying the Speed Force and putting the Flash's full power level on dazzling display, and that was awesome as a Flash fan. Okay, so themes. Is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? I think, a major theme of this story, it's based on the Flashpoint story in the comic books, is about like dealing with suffering and in this case tragedy. And we haven't all lost someone in the same kind of intense, tragic way that Barry did, but we have lesser things in our lives that are just like really hard. And we can, I think, get stuck in trying to relive those moments and say, oh, I wish I could go back. I wish I could change it. Why did this have to happen? And we can get fixated on that moment and not really know how to move on from it. Or we can move forward and allow ourselves to be shaped by those things in a positive way. And I think those are the two paths in front of Barry as he's dialoguing with both Batmans in this movie. They both have slightly different views on that. The reasons why that we deal with difficult things in life, particularly all the reasons why, are just above our capacity to apprehend and to factor. We just don't have the mental capacity or the ability to observe all the potential factors and reasons that something would be allowed. That's assuming, of course, that we believe that there is purpose for everything. I've got a verse taped up on my wall to remind me, Romans 8:28. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So there's indications throughout Scripture, if we're looking at this from a Christian perspective, that there is a purpose, there's an ultimate reason for everything, but we might only get little faint glimpses or no glimpses at all in this life. We just don't have the capacity, the ability to be aware of all the factors to say to ourselves, this is why. And if we do think that, we might have some idea of why, but we really don't know. And so given that, we shouldn't really be given the power to right, reverse, or prevent all wrongs, because it's beyond our ability to understand why God allowed them to begin with, and we would very well probably make things worse. I mean, certainly we would make things worse. We have to leave ultimate, complete justice to a perfect and all-powerful judge. And as hard as that is to do, there is also peace to be found in letting go of the need for all the answers or the power to fix everything ourselves. At some point, many times, our role is to determine how we will react to suffering, to challenges, to hardship. Will we get stuck in anger or regret, or anger maybe specifically at God that we can't actually logically justify, even though we might feel it very powerfully? Are we going to get stuck in a place like that, or are we going to ask for God's help in healing and being shaped by him so that we can be a part of some good and beautiful thing that rises, that God wants to bring about in the wake of something terrible. That's the choice I think we each face. It's a choice that Holly and I have been faced with very recently, and if you are tracking with some of my other content, you'll know about the details of that. And I am so grateful for our church family, for their grace and their support as we navigate those hard, turbulent waters where, yeah, I still want to understand why. But to the degree that I let go of the need to understand why, there is increasing peace to be found there. I'm not at peace completely, not even close. But I see in proportion to moving in that direction that I think God wants me to move in, that there is peace to be found there. And my hope is that you have support from believers who can sit in the room with you, who can put their arm around you, literally, and help you recover and heal and grow. As always, if you want help finding a church like that, let me know, and I'd be happy to try and help you look at the churches in your area by maybe visiting their websites and talking about them with you, via email. You can reach me at paeter@spiritblade.com, always. Okay, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, hang on, we're going to get to spoilers a little bit here. If I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Paeter. Okay, see it in theaters if your boys and your wife want to see it. You invited them to go along, you guys all had a great time. But maybe if they weren't chomping at the bit on their own to go, you could be content to wait and just not rent it. You'd want to own this one. You're going to enjoy it definitely that much. And then just buy it in a couple months. Because, that'd certainly be cheaper, and movies are coming to Blu-ray so much faster these days than they used to. But it's, of course, one that you're going to want to own either way. It's not all that you wanted it to be, but it's still really enjoyable, and you're probably your number 2 this year so far after D&D. A significant notch or 2 down, so something else could take that number 2 spot before the end of the year, but it's definitely, as it stands right now, your number 2 movie of the year. It's rated PG-13 for sequences of violence and action, some strong language, and partial nudity, which is just like mostly a shot from a distance of Barry without clothes on because of Speed Force related stuff. Anyway, those are all my non-spoilery thoughts on The Flash. Leave now. If you don't want spoilers, leave now. I'm going to get a drink. You have that much time to go away. All right, here we go. Let's start talking about character cameos, actor cameos, dead actor cameos. Well, first off, Gal Gadot. It was cool to see her back as Wonder Woman in a brief a scene as it was. The scene that I was talking about earlier with Batman being a little bit too pleasant or something was when he had the lasso of truth kind of wrapped around his wrist, and without realizing it was kind of like being really open in a way that at first was like, why is Batman talking about his feelings? But then as soon as you realize, oh, he's got the lasso on. Yes, of course. So yeah, her scene was very brief, but I think it was nice to just get a reminder again. Even though these movies have been few and far between and far apart, and I think Gal Gadot, this isn't the first time she's had a cameo like this. I won't spoil the other cameo, but it was not crazy long ago. But I think it's nice. It just kind of establishes, especially as we're potentially saying goodbye to the Snyderverse, it kind of reminds us that this is this shared universe that was created, that had its time, All right, so now let's get into... I guess some of the deceased, well, it's a mix of deceased and living actors, but Christopher Reeve. I called this one way back because I had heard that, even with the news that got out that Michael Keaton's playing Batman and Ben Affleck is coming back as Batman, the director was said at one point, yeah, but there is still a cameo that is going to blow people away. And I said to myself, well, if Michael Keaton is revealed, and what compared to a Michael Keaton Batman in this movie is going to blow people away? The only thing I could think of was a Christopher Reeve cameo, and his performance is so beloved, so respected. I was like, we're probably going to get a Christopher Reeve cameo, and sadly it was almost as bad as I feared it could be. It's a CGI recreation. It's on IMDb, it's credited as archived footage. I'm like, well, maybe they used archived footage as the basis for what they created here, but I don't think that's actually archived footage that's had the background removed or something as simple as that. So anyway, yeah, he doesn't say anything, which I think is probably good. That was my fear, was that he was actually going to like be talking and like have a scene with Barry. And it wasn't that. It was just kind of this flashing as all these timelines are swirling around Barry and stuff, we briefly see him. And then Helen Slater's Supergirl lightly land next to him. And I wonder, like, if they had to get her permission for that, or if they, could justify it based on her contracts back in the 80s playing Supergirl. But I mean, I thought that was really interesting, a nice nod. I think all these nods, they just felt like they were grabbing at my nostalgia. And they weren't, and like, that's all they could do with the CG quality being what it was. I think if they would have been more convincing, in the fidelity, the look, I think it could have been maybe moving to me, because it would have given the sense, as I think they wanted, that by bringing all these multiple parallel realities in at the end and the climax, they're saying, no, this all happened too. This is real. This is real. They're trying to give solidness to these other movie iterations, and kind of wrap their arms around them and say, all of this is part of what we are doing in our cinematic universe. It all has connections there, but since it didn't look real, I didn't feel like it was. I felt like it was like, oh yeah, we're seeing a clips show, especially since the first, I think, character like this that they recreated with CG was George Reeves' Superman, and they did that by showing this swirling bits of a parallel reality that was represented almost like film, where you're seeing like multiple copies of the same scene swirling past. If you haven't seen the movie, I mean, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the movie, what are you doing here? Listening to spoilers. I guess you do what you want. But it was in black and white. The representation of that Superman and the environment he was in black and white. And that was not the right foot to start on for me, if you wanted me to feel like all of these multiple realities exist and are in some way connected and really a part of what DC is doing in their movies now. It's like, what do you mean? In an alternate reality, all of existence is black and white? They even were colorizing, and the later seasons of George Reeves' Superman were in color. And so I don't know why they felt the need to do that, especially when I believe it wasn't even necessarily, I think they were doing some CG reconstruction there, maybe more heavily based on the original footage, because you basically just saw him straight on with his hands on hips pose, that classic pose, from straight on. They didn't really deviate from that. So maybe there wasn't much CG that they used to recreate him, but anyway. So that was just an interesting choice. And this one, Nicolas Cage, what a weird thing to do. That's clearly just for fans specifically who were at the time that movie they were going to make a Tim Burton directed Nicolas Cage Superman movie. Later on, the script leaked, and it involved him fighting a giant mechanical spider at one point. And so that is what we saw. We saw a Nicolas Cage long-haired Superman fighting a giant mechanical spider. And again, maybe they even brought Nicolas Cage on the set, but they at least had to de-age him. And the CG work was heavy enough that I was like, this might as well just be a CG ground-up recreation. I would believe if you told me that Nicolas Cage didn't spend a day shooting anything in mocap suits or anything, because it just looked, like CG. But I mean, it's an odd choice, because that is like, when that movie was being made, and then when it kind of fell off track, that was before the internet age was really in full swing. And it was like almost like, I mean, I wasn't in elementary school at the time, but it was almost the equivalent of like playground rumblings. You just hear from someone who heard from someone who read in a magazine, but the internet world was just not near as in full existence. And so it seems to be playing to a very specific and very unusual, well, maybe not, because since then, people have maybe become more aware who weren't even alive at that time, that was a thing back in the day, and they've done research on it. So I don't know. Either way, it seems like a weird kind of meta thing, because Nicolas Cage didn't even make that movie. That wasn't even a movie that it was like one of these things is not like the other. All these other things were like actual actors that played these characters in movies or shows that were released, but not Nicolas Cage. It was like, what in the world? I thought for a second when we saw this long-haired Superman fighting a giant thing or whatever, I was like, oh my gosh, that's going to be Dean Cain. And then when the hair parted, it was Nicolas Cage, I might have laughed out loud. Interesting choice. I think I would have preferred Dean Cain. But anyway, yeah, it is what it is. And then Adam West, another one of those that was similar to the George Reeves appearance, where it's like there was very little digital manipulation compared to the recreation that they did of Christopher Reeve. But Adam West, his Batman was represented. But now we'll get into the cameos that are most interesting to me, I think, to maybe talk about and speculate on, because they're cameos that have to do with the future direction of the DC movies at this point. The original Flashpoint story, it wasn't written to do this, but it ended up being used to reboot the DC universe with what was called the New 52 Initiative. It was a soft reboot of the continuity so that many things remained the same, but there were subtle changes, or sometimes not so subtle changes, depending on where you looked in the DC universe. And so the fact that we knew that they were adapting that story in some loose way to the silver screen, and with all the changes we knew were coming, it seemed pretty obvious that this was going to be an opportunity to reboot the continuity. It's still possible that something in the upcoming Aquaman movie could kind of further jank with time or something. Who knows what weird Atlantean magical artifacts. It's comic books. It doesn't have to be The Flash to reset continuity. So who knows what's going to happen. And James Gunn, I think, has referred to Aquaman as being the movie that kind of resets the continuity, or resets or restarts. I can't remember. I could see it as being a restarting point where the end of The Flash actually is the thing that resets it. But anyway, so first off, there's a post-credit scene, very end of all the credits, where Barry walks out of a bar with Jason Momoa's Aquaman. So this is after the final time reset that happens at the end. Don't worry, I'll get to the other bigger cameo. I'm kind of talking not necessarily in chronological order of the cameos here at the end, but we are in the post-final reset at this point. So there was someone, a couple rows behind me after the scene with Jason Momoa said, well, that was a pointless cameo or pointless scene. And, I said to my sons who were there, just kind of quietly, it's like, actually, no, it's on a meta level, what this does is it tells us that Jason Momoa's Aquaman is still the Aquaman in this new continuity. And I think maybe on another level, it reminds us that, there's an Aquaman movie coming, and Jason Momoa is that Aquaman. So I think that's probably a significant part of the reason. It was mostly a comedic scene where Aquaman's drunk and they're walking out of the bar, blah, 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 whatever. So there was nothing really that said anything about what's coming next. It's just Jason Momoa's Aquaman exists. Now, one cameo that actually might not have been what I thought it was, it might not have even been a cameo that I want to mention, is what looked like a back view of Henry Cavill's Clark Kent, very briefly. I could be wrong on this. I did a search on Google and I was like, did anybody else see this? And nothing else came up. They talked about Henry Cavill's final appearances as Superman in this movie, but mostly reconstituted and CG'd type appearances of Henry Cavill's Superman. So I didn't find any mentions of this yet. But in the scene at the end where Bruce Wayne pulls up outside the courthouse, a little swarm of reporters rush to the car, and one of them just looked unusually tall and unusually well-built and brunette. I thought I saw glasses. Of course, once this is on home video, I could better confirm what I was seeing. And maybe what it was meant to do was imply Clark Kent as like Clark exists, but it's not necessarily Henry Cavill. And that just occurred to me just now as I was talking. So maybe that's more of what's going on, is like Clark Kent's here, but we don't see his face. Who is Clark Kent? But that means they're at least going to have to cast someone that, has that kind of pretty big build as Clark Kent, and I don't like that idea. It's probably what they will do. It's how Clark Kent has been treated for decades, but I've long said that Clark Kent should be able to be like a real nerd, a real awkward, not the 1950s Christopher Reeve nerd, but whatever the modern equivalent would be. I think that is the fantasy of Superman, is being misunderstood, not recognized for how amazing you really are, and overlooked, when in fact there's something amazing about you if only people would look more closely. Anyway, that's a whole different video, a whole different topic. But if you haven't seen the movie yet, or if you go and see it again, stay hawk-eyed at the end there and tell me what you see in the comments. But maybe preface it by spoilers, and then a couple spaces and leave your comment. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if anybody else thought that or noticed that or whatever. But no, the big cameo is George Clooney as Bruce Wayne. Oh my gosh! I was stunned when I saw him come out of the car. As soon as he picked up the phone and was talking to Bruce Wayne, I was like listening. I was really tuned in. I was like, does that sound like Ben Affleck? Who might that sound like? And as soon as he talked, I was like, that doesn't necessarily sound like Ben Affleck. I thought they were going to leave it at that and be non-committal. Not say who's going to be Batman going forward, because that's a big choice to just kind of like establish in a little cameo. But they made a big choice in casting Ezra Miller back in the day as the Flash for what was going to be this big, expansive DC universe that he would presumably appear in lots of movies in. So maybe they, that's not unheard of. But when he actually stepped out of the car, and Barry was like, "What?" and said something basically like, "You're not Batman." Or you're Batman, or you're Batman, or something like that. I can't remember what he said. And what did Bruce say in response? He said something like, "What are you talking about?" Or what's the matter with you? I think he said it's like, "What's wrong with you?" or "What's the matter with you?" Which could be interpreted a couple different ways. Hey, he's in public, okay? Barry didn't say that very loudly, but loud enough that like Bruce Wayne is going to cover and say, "What is wrong with you? Why are you saying I'm Batman or I'm not Batman," or whatever it was that Barry said, So it could just be a cover for that, or could it be some weird reality where Bruce Wayne is not Batman? I really hope not. But what does that leave us with? It leaves us with George Clooney as Batman going forward. Now, of course, not the Batman. Those movies starring Robert Pattinson have already been established as like a pocket continuity separate from the wider DC universe. It looks like they're not planning on doing any Batman solo movies that are part of this wider interconnected DC universe. Instead, there will be a Batman that appears in movies like Justice League or more Flash movies, or who knows what other movies he might guest star and guest appear in. So could George Clooney be the choice for that? I think that there's some weird ways that it makes sense. I think the knee-jerk reaction of a lot of people is going to be like, no, because of course, unless you were a child, you almost certainly hated Batman and Robin. That is largely considered the worst Batman movie, and by many, myself included possibly, the worst movie of all time, at least relative to its budget. So what do we make of that? Consider also that George Clooney, since that movie, has really gotten a lot of respect for himself. He's done more kind of artistic films. I think he's done some directing. He's just a much more respected name. When he did Batman and Robin, he was that sexy guy from ER. That's who George Clooney was at the time. That's not who George Clooney is in the world of cinema today. He doesn't have to do this. And the man has a photo of himself as Batman in his office, not because he's proud of it, but he said in several interviews to remind him to be careful in the choices that he makes, So would a guy who famously regrets being in that Batman movie come back and play Bruce Wayne in future movies? Or is this just like them like getting under our skin? I don't think George Clooney is going to want to get under audience members' skin. That doesn't make any sense to me. And if this was just some one-off joke or whatever, I don't know that George Clooney's going to be on. Maybe he would. Maybe he's just kind of like far enough in his career and his life. He's just like, whatever, I don't care. But I don't think so. We know that there's a Brave and the Bold movie coming up that is going to feature, and I think maybe even focus on, Damian Wayne, who is the most recent Robin in a line of Robins. And we've had reason to think that whoever plays Batman going forward would probably be an older, seasoned Batman. I think there maybe is even going to be a Nightwing in the DC universe coming up. And so I think that you have to have, if you're going to have all those different Robins, unless you really compact their stories and their time serving as Robin to very short periods, you have to have a significantly older Batman. And Batman would at least need to be maybe in his late 30s, early 40s to be seen as kind of a dad to a elementary-ish age Damian Wayne. Or preteen or early teen Damian Wayne, you know. So we need, you know, we don't need an actor that's quite as old as George Clooney, but we, you know, need someone that's not Robert Pattinson's age, I don't think. I think they have to be older than that to be this kind of Batman with this particular Robin. So I think his age works for what they've said they're doing with Damian Wayne. And I think that we still have not come close, even with this movie, to really tapping into stories about an old, grizzled, physically worn and limited Bruce Wayne Batman. They did touch on that some in this movie. I'm glad that they at least briefly referenced, you know, like Batman said, this is gonna hurt, you know, right before he springs into action. This might hurt, you know. But George Clooney as Batman was bad, I think, because of the writing and the directing style versus what we all wanted as comic book fans at the time. I think arguably it's a great children's movie. Why they chose to make a children's movie out of that franchise at that time is completely beyond me. Well, no, it's not. They wanted to sell action figures and toys. That's basically very much established and confirmed. But I'm guessing that George Clooney came on board initially not realizing what he was getting himself into, thinking that it was going to be a more serious film. And in fact, his scenes as Bruce Wayne were some of the best Bruce Wayne scenes that I've seen in the Batman franchise. He had a really solid, I would even say good, Bruce Wayne. He had that suave playboy act down. His Batman, I think, was more smiley and jokey, but I think that was probably the result of direction and not wanting it to be too serious. And then him just maybe feeling dead inside on the set. I don't know. But if we just ignore Batman and Robin for a moment, even though I know that's kind of counter to this whole exercise, because it's the point of why he's being cast here. But if we think about George Clooney as a writer, as a director, as an actor, who he's been, what he's done since then, I think we could have maybe a really good older Batman in George Clooney at this point. Could it be a one-off thing? Yes, it could. There could be further resets at this point as a result of the Aquaman movie, or who knows what. But am I open to seeing what could come of George Clooney as an older Batman? I can't believe I'm saying that I am. I am open to that. Because I think that he is, you know, in a better place to give us reason to think that it'll be something good and solid and respectable than he was back in the day. Anyway, crazy. I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions, as always, in the comments below. And if you want to like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected, all that stuff I really appreciate. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for all of their support. You can get info about the benefits of joining over at patreon.com/Spirit Blade Productions. Then I hope you'll check out our podcast and stay connected to all CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.